Yeah, Eric Little. Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Today we're in this session going to hear from Eric Little, and he will be talking about combining knowledge graphs with probabilistic graphs for advanced search and reasoning in clinical trials applications. So take it away, Eric.
Thanks very much. So what I'm going to talk about here is some work that we're doing at Accenture that we're really excited about to help drive new kinds of clinical trial development. So if we kind of go into the history of clinical trials, historically it takes around 7 to 15 years to bring a drug from inception to market. And a lot of that time is spent, of course, in the clinical trials phases. So you can see that there are normally like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 clinical trials. Sometimes these phases may need extensions or need repeated. But you can see in the graphic on the right from medium.com, in stage 1, you can go from 10,000 compounds down to 250 compounds down to 5 compounds just to get to one actual drug that works. Now, the COVID-19 landscape really helped to change this because we saw an acceleration of vaccines that were being made in under a year. But, the question is this really the new norm? And it might be for things like vaccines or when we are in an emergency situation, but it's not necessarily the new norm, especially if we look at more complex kinds of diseases such as cancers and things like this. So one of the things that we're really keen on helping our clients to understand is this idea that setting up and maintaining clinical trials is just really, really challenging still. And so it doesn't matter whether you're doing a COVID study or whether you're doing a cancer study or a diabetes study or a heart disease study. There's a lot of challenges that our clients face in finding enough participants. So you can see here that 50% of clinical trials don't even run because they can't get enough participants in. In terms of selecting participants nowadays, there's a big push for companies to be able to understand whether they should run a traditional centralized clinical trial, meaning do you run this trial at a medical site, a hospital or something like this, or a couple of hospitals where the patients go into the site quite frequently and have tests done and see physicians, versus decentralized trials where it's more telemedicine. People are wearing wearables at home. They're interacting perhaps with their television or the internet, and they're kind of self-reporting. So this way you can have hopefully more patients that can enroll. But now the challenges are those people are spread out all over the place. It's very, very difficult to sometimes gather their data. It can be hard to maintain a good cohesive relationship with them. So a lot of people are still dropping out of those kinds of studies. And so this is a real challenge. So finding participants is not only hard, but it's very expensive. And finding replacements for those participants, if they drop, can be even 4 times as much in terms of cost. So what we're proposing here is that if we could come up with abilities to find patterns in existing data from these past studies, we think that we can help to predict these types of behaviors and trends in future studies. So what my team and I are working on is a platform that will help our clients in big pharma, biotech, healthcare, and so on, to really help carve into this problem of cost, delays, recruitment, retention, and so on, to really allow these clinical trials to have a better chance of success and to help set them up so that they can show the kinds of results that they're after much faster. So a couple of ways that align to our goals in Accenture overall, and especially in life sciences, is that we work with our clients to really understand their challenges and to understand the roadblocks that they're facing. So we have a couple of keys that we can draw from here. The first one is this one Accenture mindset. So we're a massive company. We're almost 700,000 people. So that gives us the ability to draw a lot of resources from a lot of areas of expertise. So we can really find people from across our own organization and bring them in with their specialized skill sets to do some of the technology that I'm going to talk about in this talk. Another aim of Accenture is to bring our clients on a journey to cloud. This is to get them out of the older relational data warehouse, privatized data structures where everything is inside their walls, and bring them to more of a big data environment where they have microservice architectures, where you have cloud scalability, where you can take advantage of data sets that are not necessarily right next to you, but could exist somewhere else in the world. And then the last one here you see is an initiative started by some of our colleagues in the research domain in life sciences, which is really this idea of, can we bring billions to millions in terms of getting these drugs into the market space? So we're working with clients in this case to really reduce the amount of investment needed, because if they could bring drugs to market at an order of magnitude lower in price, they could do more with less money. So these are three of our main pillars that are going to kind of underlie, from a business perspective, what we're doing then in a technology perspective. So since this is a knowledge graph conference, and since I'm a kind of card-carrying ontologist for many, many years, we are actually applying fair data principles in the first place to help do this. Now, fair data, as I'm sure most of the people at this conference know, means making your data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we have multiple customers that are actively running projects that are using semantics and that are looking into fair data. But they often face a lot of challenges in the implementation of that. Semantic systems can be a problem for them because they need to scale them to these kinds of enterprise applications. And oftentimes, as we've seen over the last 20 years with semantics, there are challenges to scaling things like triple stores. There are challenges to running reasoning in graphs so that they're as performant as some of their neighboring technologies, like maybe some big data or Elasticsearch, or things that use more of an indexing strategy than an associative graph strategy. Our clients are also looking for a lot of advanced reasoning. So that's one of the cases where even if you have a good ontology model built and it works well for search, it may become very slow or non-performant as you add layers of advanced reasoning there. So we're going to really talk about what we're doing to help offset that. And then the first key to success for all of these companies is helping them to better effectively manage their metadata. And so semantics definitely helps us there, between providing things like at the base level controlled vocabularies where we can handle terms and synonyms and definitions. So things having to do with, LOINC codes or CPT codes for treatments, or ICD codes for diagnosis, or whatever, putting those into taxonomies so we can develop subclass, superclass relationships, and then extending those ontologies to have horizontal relationships where you build actual ontologies in RDF and OWL. And as we all know, in the biomedical space, one of the advantages there is that we can actually leverage a lot of open source models. But then there is the added challenge of taking those open source models and fitting them to our clients' data sets so that they actually work for them. So even though everyone wants to always go to analytics, and everyone wants to talk about AI, and people love to talk about machine learning and such, really these analytics products are going to start with an intelligence search, okay? If you can't find your data, if you don't even know where the data is, how to access it, how to even understand what the structures are, what the data is about, good luck trying to build any advanced analytics on top of it. And furthermore, because knowledge graphs take a logical view of the world that is more or less top down, if you start with a pure bottom-up approach, like boiling things up using just statistics, you're going to wind up with a lot of clusters that are going to be non-related to each other. You're just going to kind of get a mess of data that's still very hard to manage and understand. So what we're really working on is the ability to move from this type of typical tabular metadata to something that is graph-based, where we can really flesh out those kinds of advanced relationships in there. So for example, I'm listing here some items, like one client would like a 360 degree view of patient data in their translational medicine study. So what can you tell me completely about this patient that's going through for example, a cancer treatment. Client 2 would like to understand better strategies for their patient recruitment, their site selection, their patient retention in their studies. Client 3 would like to be able to link clinical data all the way back to their research data. So what was the molecule? What were the biomarkers? What were the pathways? So these are very different kinds of examples, and this is part of the challenge in working in the life sciences areas. The level of modeling, the level of precision needed is very, very high. And so going to semantics gives us certain advantages. So we can understand the data elements much better. We can define all of these complex relationships that we need in biology and in chemistry and so on. We can improve search results so that people get the targeted and contextual data that they're looking for. The models now, the metadata becomes both human and machine readable, which is kind of a big deal because it helps to really develop these kinds of concepts in the data. And then we can apply those FAIR principles. So basically, what we've done is we have built a platform called Intient that is in an alpha stage right now, moving to beta. And what we are able to do is we have a highly scalable cloud technology platform that answers the mail on that journey to cloud piece I talked about. So we have robust ingest pipelines. We can semi-auto the indexing. It comes with all of the security, so we can handle HIPAA controlled data. And we have a lot of things like user-based access control and all of the guts you would expect a full-blown enterprise cloud-level IT system to have. Once data is ingested, it goes through our data catalog. This is where we semantically enable vocabulary. So we put our semantic metadata around this data here. This in turn leads to our smart search capability, so that we can actually, when we look at, for example, if you query data about minority patients, the system is smart enough to know you mean demographic data. So it will bring back sets on demographics instead of bringing back everything in a keyword search that has to do with minority or patient or minority patient or something else. So instead of getting these large blasts, we're able to target the data. If you look up certain diagnoses for diseases, it knows to bring you back diagnosis data around ICD codes, right? And if you look for certain types of, if you type in United States or something, it knows you want geolocations, these kinds of things. From there, we move into our advanced analytics, and this is kind of really the part here in the cycle where I think we're doing some very interesting work. And this is how we're fusing and marrying the semantic capabilities from our logical models into the statistical capabilities that are actually needed for advanced analytics. So here we're able to cluster data, group data, plot data. We're able to build predictions. We're able to look at percentages and weights and measures, and I'll show some examples of this in a bit. But ultimately, everything needs to be driven to these kinds of domain-specific visualizations because our clients want to use different types of dashboards, BI tools, and such, whether it's Tableau, Spotfire, Looker, whatever. And they're really not looking for all of this complexity in the back end, right? These are not necessarily heavy-duty IT people. These are people trying to run or manage or engage in a clinical trial, and they just need the right data brought to them in the right way so that they can make decisions. So how do we move to advanced analytics and AI then? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to actually apply a technique that I've been working on since my postdoctoral days in around like 2002, which was actually designed and built in the defense and intelligence space. So there is a way that you can start to fuse knowledge graphs to other kinds of statistical models, such as Bayesian networks. And the reason for this is, again, knowledge graphs give you a nice logical view of the world, but Bayesian networks allow you to build statistical or probabilistic graphs on top of that ontology, and then to optimize in things over time. So what we're ultimately doing here is we are using the knowledge graph basically to organize our metadata, to manage our terminologies, to manage our classification systems. It tells us what the data is and where the data is located across these different disparate sources. But we try to keep all of the reasoning, or as much as possible, the reasoning out of these graphs. And what we like to do is we like to rather build the reasoning statistically on top. So the knowledge graph is organizing the data logically, and we're using the statistical probabilistic graphs to do the heavy computes. So it kind of looks like this. You have an environment. We build an ontology that sits on top of the environment and describes what's going on there. We build statistical graphs on top that of course utilize this type of mathematics. It utilizes probabilities, all the things ontologies are not really good at. Ontologies take a very God's eye view of the world. These things take a very instance level or particular view of the world. And so what we do is we want to make sure, though, that the nodes in the probabilistic graph align to and feed off of the nodes and arcs that are in the knowledge graph. So the knowledge graph, again, is describing what things are and where they are. This takes that information and says, now I'm going to compute certain weights and measures and probabilities on those. And then we can build optimizations on top where we can find things like the shortest path through the data or do random forest or do these kinds of advanced calculations. And so, well, what does this mean? Well, the driving of insights to users is really what we're after. So we're allowing customers now to pivot between a lot of data elements and to really drive those insights. They can utilize BI tools to visualize the data in really any way, and they can utilize their past data to now see and infer new patterns and predict similarities in the future. And so what we're doing here is we're saying if you have probabilistic query capabilities, you maybe want to ask questions like, what is the best performing study that I'm currently running? Or which compound do I see that has the most promise in the next study? Or perhaps what are some potential adverse events that we will see in this study based on what we've seen in similar compounds or similar studies in the past? What's the effect on the patient measurements? How long until the efficacy of this drug actually occurs, right? So we can capture these new kinds of data elements and then move into things like, based on similar profiles, who's most likely to not adhere to a study or to drop out. So if I can understand the patterns of who's dropped in the past, I can probably infer who may drop in the future. And then we can translate these from robotics domains into life sciences, right? So we've taken this kind of approach that Accenture was doing using intelligent robots, and we basically brought it over to clinical and patient so that people can ask this kind of what if analysis, run simulated outcomes, and do Monte Carlo experimentation. So if we look at the output of this, what happens is after the knowledge graph organizes the data, it will organize things, of course, in the knowledge graph, for example, around patients and race. And it will say, well, a patient is a person. They have an attribute of a race. They have an attribute of an age. They have an attribute of a location. They have a diagnosis. That diagnosis has an ICD code, and so on and so on. So what this is showing is that users can now see multiple facets of their study at one time. It allows them for real-time monitoring. So this chart is showing you the racial breakdown, blue being African American, yellow being Asian participants, green being Native or Alaskan American. And so you can see the different kinds of racial diversity profiles based on these different site locations. We can also plot those site locations using the geo data so that users can also see where exactly do these hospital centers or sites occur, in this case in San Francisco. We can also look at across those different sites and across the timing in some area, what is the pattern of breast cancer diagnosis over time, right? So this is one example of using the knowledge graph to organize this data around these kinds of diagnoses codes, around geolocations, around race and other attributes, but then drive them to this type of statistical analysis. And if we take it further, what we see is that if we really drive this what-if analysis, we can start to bring in areas like which clinical trial is more likely to successfully meet my recruitment goals. And here you'll see there are 8 different types of facets to this question. So maybe you care about the site speed to data, so the time from being selected to the first subject that gets in. How many cancer patients are they currently enrolling at the site? What is the level of experience of the people who work there? What's the site screen fail rate, and so on and so on? What is the retention rate? So what we're allowing users to do here is to see how we've actually weighted these algorithms, and an expert could go in and say, no, I actually think this 0.2 is much higher. I would put this at 0.7. They can click on this, they can change this weighting, and that will then in turn reorganize the selection criteria. It will re-rank this list of sites based on how you want to weight these different facets of the site. Furthermore, if you say, okay, what I really want to do is I want to find a specific racial profile in this for this trial. And the reason they want to find this is because many organizations get dinged by the FDA for running their trials on predominantly white participants. One of the things we're working on is to actually be able to adjust using basic sliders the kind of percentage of racial profile that you're looking for, right? So what percentage of the participants do you want to be African American, or do you want to be Asian? And if you can set this type of profile, it will then go through, and using what I showed in the past, it will help you to select the appropriate site that you have the best chance of finding this kind of racial makeup for your study. So this is using, again, kind of that forward-leaning predictive aspect of this. I'll stop now because I'm pretty much out of time, and I'll see if there are any questions from the audience. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. That was really interesting. We do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to go in the order of sort of the votes, or a couple of the ones that have been voted up. One of them is where we can find the slides. So if you do have a link handy, if you could maybe drop it in the chat. I think all the speakers are supposed to upload their slides probably at some point. But yeah, that was one question. Mm-hmm. Another question is, have you published this methodology in full or in part?
There were pieces of this that I have published in different papers throughout my career, but it was not for this application. So I have published parts of this kind of methodology years back in various kinds of defense publications and in a couple of other formal ontology publications and things like this. Yeah. So if anyone wants to contact me afterwards, I'm happy to share my list of publications, or you can look me up on some of the academic sites and such, and find these papers.
And the next question actually is in line with something that I was just thinking of. Really interesting how you have the sort of knowledge graph layer for the modeling piece, and then you're like, okay, let's just do the statistical analysis, the heavy lifting, and a separate layer. So this question's asking, what are your rules of thumb for what to model directly in the logical model or knowledge graph versus what to compute in the statistical layer?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the knowledge graph, you want to capture all of the entities, first of all, that are in the data. So as we suck the data into the ingest pipeline, it comes with certain indexing or metadata around it. So you definitely want to be able to capture that stuff, because you're going to need that to actually interrogate or dive into the data. So that's like table names, column headers, row level data. It could be in flat files. It could be your indents, your table names, things like that. If it's in unstructured data, you need a natural language processing engine that is doing things like named entity recognition or entity tagging. Those would go into a document repository like an Elasticsearch or a MongoDB or something like that. And then those tagged entities would again have to have a faithful representation in the ontologies. Now, what I'll say about the knowledge graph is I am a strong believer in building multiple knowledge graphs. So don't build big monolithic models, okay? You're better off to have smaller targeted models that fit specific domains, okay? So we, for example, would not build all of the drug ontology information or chemistry ontology information into the same model as we would, say, a biology model or a clinical trials model. Instead, what you want is you want to always make these kinds of philosophical considerations about how you break up those subdomains, because if you make them smaller, number one, they compute easier and is less strain on your triple store. And number two, you simply can connect them together into different kinds of patterns, or into different kinds of groupings, and you can actually then assign those to different types of users or use cases. So in this case, maybe you want to see chemistry related to pathways. So how does this drug affect receptors, and then how do those receptors affect other cells or receptors in the pathway? Or you may want to know what is the adverse event around a drug. So what were reported side effects of people who took that drug, and what were some of the symptoms that they noticed? Those are two very different questions, both of which would use the same drug chemistry data about active ingredients and CAS numbers and so on. So keep your models small. That's the first thing. Glue them together in different ways. That helps with reusability. And you want to describe basically as much as you need, right? So normally we take the elements from the data and then we will augment them with what the experts in that area tell us that they think about the domain. So sometimes you have to add in some extra classes and relationships and attributes based on what the subject matter experts tell us. And then what we do is the things you want to compute over, we basically take the nodes off of the knowledge graph, and those become the nodes in the statistical graph. What happens though in the statistical graph, this probabilistic graph here in the middle, is you'll see that they're very flat graphs. So you get a node and you get a lot of attributes off the node, and then you have another node and a lot of attributes off that node, because these nodes are really being used to calculate the different entities that you care about fusing together or you care about reasoning over. So these graphs should be faithful to the knowledge graph, but their structure is going to deviate because of how they're flatter and they work differently. On top of that, then you can build those optimizations, which will help you to, again, find things like shortest path, random forest, that type of stuff in the data, so that you can actually bring back very, very fast kinds of compute. So, model everything you can. Model definitely everything in the data. Get as much subject matter expertise as you can in the knowledge graph. Keep the models as small as you can. And when it comes to the statistical probabilistic graphs, start with the use cases of what are the problems people are trying to solve for and what are they trying to calculate over, and do that reasoning. Then make sure you have a good alignment between those nodes and arcs to the nodes and arcs in the knowledge graph, and you should be pretty good to start with.
Yeah, I think you might have covered some of the other questions, but we're also close to the end of time. And I think you said if people have more questions or need more clarification, they can just contact you directly, and then
you can ping me on my LinkedIn page, or you can ping me with my Accenture email, eric.little@accenture.com. My slides should be up there. I had a little bit of a problem getting them online, but they should be there now. So,
okay, thank you very much. This was really fascinating. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice day.